It's Fill Your Plate Now, where every bite brings you closer to the farm gate and further from what's unhealthy. Now here's your hosts, Julie and Tammy, helping you live well by filling your plate well.
So we have a guest today that's going to teach us all about meat science. She's young and brilliant and kind of has a fan base. She at least does here in Arizona with the Women's Leadership Committee, because she's going to be our keynote for the summer agricultural conference that's in, I believe, the second or third week in July. We'll put notes on that in the subject description. But she's also from Ohio.
Yeah, I was born
originally.
I was born in Toledo,
Okay.
and we grew up. My father was an Ohio State alum, so the Ohio State University was always the team we rooted for.
Awesome.
And I also think she's got a lot of practical tips too for our listeners.
Yes.
In terms of meat and meat cuts, and I'm excited to hear a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I can tell you already have an affinity for her, but our guest today is Sierra Anthony. She is a meat scientist and the owner of Butcher Solutions, LLC, and it sounds like just after your master's that you got in, was it the University of Wyoming?
Actually, the University of Idaho. I went and coached meat teams in Wyoming. Yeah.
And I think right after you got your master's, you launched this business, and it's basically a traveling butcher school and meat science education environment. And you're based out of Montana. So the first question I have for you is, how many days on the road are you?
Oh, that's a great question. I did some statistics on it. I think it was like my second or third year when I was having the business. And I wanted to know, because I was on the road a lot. And I think it's about a third of the year that I'm actually traveling and out and about. And my average trip length is somewhere between about 4 days. It's, sometimes it's a touch and go. I just show up and train for a day or two, and other days I fight for a couple of weeks.
You're young and she's bright, so I can see why she can do that. When earlier in my career, I would be 2 weeks on in the headquarters for the company that I worked for at the time, and then 2 weeks back at home. And that lasted for about 4 years, and I had a ball with it. But that was quite a bit.
But I think this also shows us, too, there are so many
career opportunities
yep. that may not be your standard career opportunities, where, new fields that can be opened up and you can thrive.
And your angle on this business and meat science is just so fascinating. That's what I want to get into. So you grew up in a farm in Ohio, but you discovered meat sciences in college. What was that aha moment for you, and why you said, I'm going to figure out a way to turn this into a business?
Grew up on a cattle farm. We had Angus beef cattle. We had a grain operation, and my sister was always the one that we knew would be the one to work with the cattle every single day. And I knew that I wanted to be in the beef industry some way, some shape, somehow. What that was going to look like yet. And so my major as an undergrad was ag business. My dad always, I'd asked him, it's like, if you could go back and do it again, what would you do different? And he always said, I would have taken more business classes and I would have paid more attention in them. And so I was a business major, but an animal science minor. I never wanted to be a vet. I had later I found out that I have a better affinity for keeping things dead than I do trying to keep them alive. So going into my senior year of undergrad, I wanted to take the beef production class. But because I wasn't an animal science major, it was full, and they, wouldn't allow me into the class. And so I was really disappointed, because I'd waited my whole career to take the beef production class. And so I was like, well, I guess as a consolation, I'll take the meat science class. Beef production, meat, it's the same thing, right? Not the same thing. But by my second day in that class, I found and said, wow, I get to buy knives instead of books. And everything I classes, it's hands-on. I'm, one day, on Tuesday, we're killing the animals. On Thursday, we're cutting those same critters. You get to learn all the scientific names of muscles. And so I was just hooked in the history of the meat industry and how it fits into the wider scope of livestock production. And I was like, oh, this is where I fit, where I can talk to the consumer, but I also need to have a good relationship with the producer and understand why we're producing cattle and pigs and lambs the way that we are, how that relates to meat quality, what the butchers need to know to be able to communicate with both the livestock producer and the consumer. And so it was just this perfect storm. And so I joined the meat judging team. I started working in the meat lab, and it just all kind of snowballed from there.
What a powerful aha moment.
Oh, absolutely. And then you went on to get your master's. And I had not heard of a master's in, let's see if I say it right, innovative carcass fabrication before. Could you explain to our listeners what that is and what you learn in it?
Yeah, so in between undergrad and my master's degree, I taught at the University of Wyoming, and I was their meat judging coach, and I loved working with college students, and getting so excited about meat science, from a variety of majors, ag business majors, agricultural educators, yeah, just all walks of life. And so I had this idea for the business, and it really sprouted from COVID when I couldn't get my meat judgers into the big packing plants to practice. We were going to smaller ones. And so every time we were in a smaller meat process, I'd ask the guys, I was like, how are you doing? They're like, we're great. Business has never been better. Nobody has ever cared so much about local meat production during COVID. And so that's really what sparked my thought for the business is, wow, if I can get college students excited about butchery and meat science, then surely I can get other people excited about this trade. And what do I need to do for myself to go and work for a butchery school or to start one, because I found that they just didn't really exist. And so for me, it became I need to become a better butcher myself. And I've already got the excitement for meat science, but I just need to be a better butcher. And so I'd already had a connection with Dr. Phil Bass. He had worked with certified Angus beef when I had interned there in college. We are going to do some cool things with the beef sirloin. So if you want to come on out here, let's find some new fun ways to make the sirloin more exciting. The meat industry is already, back in the 2000s, had done some really excited research with the chuck, but the sirloin was still just kind of a little boring, somewhere in the middle there. It's fine, it's exciting. It's not quite as exciting as your ribeyes and your strip loins, but it's not as low quality as some of the other steaks or roasts. And so if you go out for a sirloin, it's just an okay experience. And so we were setting out to, what research can we do on sirloin to understand it a little bit more, from the size of the carcass, what makes it either a consistent or inconsistent eating experience. How can we generate more excitement for sirloin cuts, for all of our consumers?
Okay, so as part of your work and your research, I noticed that you have focused on underutilized cuts of meat. Talk to us a little bit about that and what our listeners should look for, because we tend to just go with something like a sirloin or a chuck and don't know a lot about some of these other cuts.
Sure. And there are plenty of cuts that are starting to gain a lot of traction. And it really comes down to our butchers of how well they are representing those cuts. Because several of them have many different names. And I don't know why we've done that as butchers, but we've made it difficult for consumers to recognize which ones are which. So take for example, so on the sirloin, there is a cut, it's called the sirloin cap. And it's a big triangular shaped muscle. But it also goes by the name of the culotte or the picanha, which is Brazil's tenderloin. If Brazil could make the entire carcass out of the picanha, they would. And this is actually one of my favorite cuts. If it's my birthday or a special occasion, or I want to impress somebody, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna buy a culotte or a picanha. It's just a flavorful muscle with a big fat cap. Um, and so that's one that's starting to gain a lot of traction, but that it's confusing to consumers because it has three names. And so if a consumer can remember one of those names, that we're excited about it. Another similar cut that's gaining traction but is kind of confusing is the bavette, or the sirloin flap. And so that muscle, it lines the abdominal wall of the carcass. And so it is similar in terms of its shape of a skirt steak. It's similar in how you would cook it, marinate it, and slice it like a skirt steak, but it's not a skirt steak. And so in our smaller butcher shops, a lot of times, if those butchers aren't really well trained to recognize that that cut is different, um, then they're just like, oh, then that's the third skirt steak on the carcass. No, 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 no. We only have two skirt steaks on the carcass. We have an inside skirt and outside skirt, but then we have this bavette, which is a thicker portion. It actually has more marbling in it. You can cut it like steak thickness. And so that cut is really, really popular in cultures that do a lot of marinating and slicing, like a Texas, where like fajita meat's really popular. And so the bavette is getting more traction across the country, and you can probably find it more so in a grocery store or on a restaurant where those cuts are coming from a larger meat packer, because they are our large meat packers are the ones that are pulling off these innovative steaks and cuts, because they can make the margin work for them. The extra time that it takes for a butcher to pull off some of these innovative cuts, they can make up for that time in the volume. Versus our smaller mom and pop shops in our local communities, they might not have, number one, the time to train the butchers on where these cuts come from, and then number two, they might not know how to price that steak. How much should I mark it up to account for the time that it took me to cut it? Will a customer actually even know or recognize that steak and know that it's great? Or are we going to have to do a lot of customer education? Are we going to have to, take a picture of it and post on Facebook and tell people, wow, this is a new cut that's in our meat case, and here's a recipe for how to cook it? That's more work on their management side then too. It's not just putting a T-bone in the meat case and everybody knows, I'm excited about a T-bone. And so it's great for small butchers to want to cut new and innovative steaks and be excited about them. But there is consumer education that happens there, and that has to take place first. And so that's where we do rely on our restaurant industry to kind of get people interested and excited in those new cuts first. And so if somebody sees it on a restaurant menu and they want to try it, it's like, oh, and then they go to their butcher shop and they might ask, hey, can you cut me that bavette steak? Or there was a steak, it was called the Merlot. There's a steak called the flat iron. I mean, the flat iron came out in the 2000s. That's when that research was done. And we started boning out chucks and saving some of those really tasty steaks and not just running them through a bandsaw. But that research was done in 2001, 2002. It's taken us 25 years for people to get excited about a flat iron and to recognize it when they see it, and for butchers to retrain themselves and find the value in cutting it. And so we can get, gosh, oodles of numbers of steaks off of these carcasses, but having consumers find value in them,
Sierra, you're
that's where it
making
all
me hungry.
starts.
And I have a real quick,
That's my job.
good. I have a real quick story too. You had said the pandemic, you had made reference to that earlier, and how it kind of probably inspired your Butcher Solutions. But on our fillyourplate.org website, we used to average about 25 direct market beef producers. Over the pandemic, that doubled overnight because a lot of them saw that, well, their friends and family were telling them, hey, I want to buy beef from you. So it's interesting that you should say that. And that is a segue to my question. Is that what inspired Butcher Solutions, or was it a combination of what you've just been explaining with Tammy's question, that there's so much for these local butchers to learn in order to maximize on these really impressive cuts that they can get out of the carcass?
What we saw in 2020 was a big influx of USDA grant dollars that existed. And that came as a result of so many of these livestock producers said, wow, I can't get my cattle, my pigs, I can't get my animals to market. And so I need to take them and market them in my local community. Well, butcher shops were booked 2 years in advance. People were panicking. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't harvest the animals that are ready right now. What do I do? Their solution was, well, I'm a livestock producer, but by golly, I'm going to build a meat shop. And that was the solution for a lot of meat producer or livestock producers. They put it on their own shoulders of I am already doing everything I can to raise these animals. I guess now I need to be the meat processor. And that's just the resilience of our livestock community is they see a problem and they say I'm going to fix it because, if somebody else isn't going to do it for me, I'm going to do it myself. And so it was really inspiring to see how many livestock producers said it's like no problem. I'll figure it out. I know nothing about the meat industry, but I'm going to build something because our community needs it. And so
But it did sound like that's what spawned your Butcher Solutions then, right?
well, and ultimately, those livestock producers, they actually did it, by golly. They went out, they found grant dollars, they built the facility. They did it quick too. They they said we need a facility now. So they got the money, they built the facility, they found out who's going to run it, and it's they wrangled in their sons, their daughters, their in-laws, their cousins, their friends. Everybody is now a part of this meat processing plant. And then they say, huh, I'm a I want to go back to actually raising cattle and pigs and sheep. I don't want to be a butcher every day. And so, who am I going to have actually run this plant? Or, my son's okay with running it. My daughter's cool with it, but they don't know how to cut meat. And so, we had so many people who they need to get back to raising livestock. They built this wonderful thing. And so that was where I saw my niche was it's like, great, I can train butchers, no problem. And these livestock producers, they were so energetic and ready to save meat processing in their community. They're happy, energetic, um, you know, full of resources and connection to the community. They just needed somebody to come in and teach them how to cut meat, which is for me, that's no problem. They already did the hard stuff.
Well, and I love that, they met a need during the pandemic and ran with it. But
And it's such an inspiration too that because of that, they're always wanting to fix, but it also spawned a very impressive niche for your business model. But it's going to keep you on the road a lot. You got to be prepared for that.
So I want to change gears and take your knowledge to the hunting area. And I love that you identify as an adult onset hunter. I had never heard that term before. I think that's great. And just for all those hunters out there, what are some of the, biggest mistakes that you see individuals make on that with the field to table process, and what can they do to correct that?
Yeah, so I am adult onset hunter. And so I grew up in Ohio, but sitting in a deer stand did not ever interest me. And so when I was living in Wyoming, I excuse me, I met my husband, and he took me on my very first hunt. And I was like, wow, this is really fun because we get to hike around and look at it. Like that was really exciting. The hiking part was exciting for me, and the thrill of the pack out and all of this was really great. And I'll never forget our very first hunt. We were hunting for pronghorn antelope. And my husband, he's talking about, well, that one's really wide and that one's pretty tall. I'm like, no, it's not. It's like, how about that one? That one's really wide. He's got some mass. Well, I was like, no, he doesn't. Comes to find out, I am looking at the body size of these animals as if they are livestock, and he's looking at the antlers. And so that was an eye opener for me of like, oh, I am looking at hunting through a meat science lens, which then has led me to wanting to educate the hunting community on more meat science practices because if folks want to be hunters, they get to be a butcher at least one day out of every year. Um, and so the first real like meat science myth that I have debunked with the hunting community is do not wash your meat. Do not rinse the carcass, because I think that's the first thing that folks want to do is they've just harvested an animal, whether that's pulling the whole thing out whole, if it's gutted, if they've quartered it, whatever it is, the first thing they want to do is say, well, I brought back sticks and leaves and rocks and everything. I'm going to wash my meat and then it's going to be clean. Well, what you've just done is wherever that bacteria was, or the pathogen, or the dirt, you've just spread it from one localized area all over the carcass, and you don't know where it's gone. And so it's very easy to trim away any contaminants if they are very localized, and okay, this is where I split the hide at, this is where the most hair is, this is where I had to eviscerate the animals, there might be some ingested, where some of those pathogens might be, and so it's easy to trim them. But if you rinse the carcass, you don't know where they've gone. So that's, number one. But also number two, kind of the golden standard of meat care and meat safety is keep your meat cool and keep it dry. And so if you keep your meat cool and dry, that's, hunting is not a best case scenario. It is not the perfect sterile environment. It's anything but sterile. It's anything but perfect. But if hunters can try to keep their meat cool and dry, they've got the best chance of reducing any negative implications of, tenderness, color, of flavor. Any of those issues can be solved with just keeping that meat cool and dry. That will reduce any spoilage. And so, folks who want to rinse their meat, that's not keeping it dry. And so, bacteria might grow from there. So, yep, keep it cool, keep dry.
That's great.
I turn it into a song. Cool and dry, cool and dry.
We can cut that part, can't we? No,
How does there are 1,000 questions I could ask you, but how does proper butchery and aging affect the final taste and texture of meat? We're basically asking for some more basics on butchering. Any myths about fresh is always best, that you can bust? What are some of these things, baselines? You've given us some baselines about cool and dry, but what about some of the other
So
things?
let's talk the two most simple forms of aging that we have. We have wet aging and we have dry aging. And so in our large meat packing facilities, those facilities are using wet aging, where those plants are killing 5 to 6,000 head of cattle every day. The pork industry, they're going through a lot more than that, and poultry, goodness, they're going through even more than that. And so in the beef industry, if we think about those beef cattle, they're coming in on day one and they're harvested, and they might hang for a day, maybe less, and then the next day they are being cut. And so they're only in that processing facility for about 2 days. And once that meat is cut, it's being put into vacuum sealed bags as whole subprimals. So there might be, a boneless chuck or a whole sirloin or a whole loin, and they're being vacuum sealed. And then they are shipped, those subprimals are shipped all over the country to our grocery stores, to our restaurants, to a further processing facility. Because think of your grocery store. You don't see hanging carcasses in grocery stores anymore. They're buying in boxed beef. Um, and so that meat, its aging process is happening while it's in a vacuum sealed environment. And so that vacuum seal is, keeping it separated from air. And so it's doing all of its enzymatic breakdown and work and aging while it's in that vacuum sealed environment. And it can be on a truck, refrigerated across the country in a week. And so it's still being aged for a week. It might sit on a shelf then for another 2 weeks or so. And so there's still aging happening, but it is wet aging. And so that creates one kind of a flavor. It's in a meat science sense, it's considered a little bit more on the sour side. Versus when we get to dry aging, that's a different kind of a flavor. It's a little bit more earthy, umami, like a savory beef flavor. And so the dry aging, that even has a couple different levels to it. So if you think of your local meat processing shop, where those carcasses are harvested on day one and then they hang in a cooler for 1 week up to 2 weeks, that enzymatic activity is happening through more of a dry environment. Um, once that hanging process has completed, typically 14 to 21 days is the ideal time period. So that's about when those enzymes all of their tenderness work is kind of completed. So any tenderness benefits that you'll get from hanging that carcass are kind of wrapped up after 21 days. um, and then if you want to take that meat product, we hear about a dry aged steak or a dry aged this or that for dry aged for 48 days or whatever. That is being aged for a flavor perspective. And so the longer that a strip loin subprimal could dry age, that's developing some of those good molds. It's developing a really interesting flavor profile. And gosh, there are some meat scientists that only specialize in dry aging, and they found some really cool research, or just some fascinating findings about some of the molds that grow in those dry aging for flavor environments. The same molds that are in penicillin, or the way that blue cheese develops different flavors in different parts of the world. That's kind of how this unique mold situation is happening in our beef environment. So a dry aged steak in Chicago might taste different than a dry aged steak in LA or in Paris. So anyway, we could, yeah.
Yeah,
I have
that is
to tell you a real fun story, and maybe you've had an experience like this too, Tammy. Growing up as a little girl, hanging out with my grandpa, who was like my best buddy, and he would take me to the local meat locker in downtown Chandler. Thomas Locker, I believe, was the name of it at the time. It's no longer there. Although I am excited based on what you're telling us, Sierra. There's a resurgence of some of these local meat locker places. But he would go in there to check his beef because it was being dry aged, and he never wanted it to go less than something like 14 to 21 days. So
wow.
you're telling that story, Sierra is bringing memories up of my best grandpa.
That's fascinating. The dry aging is fascinating. Is more product wet or dry in the U.S. As far as aging?
I would say from a volume perspective, I would say wet aging, just simply from our large meat packers and how much volume they're harvesting every single day.
Okay, and yeah, and you did mention a little bit earlier about the small and medium-sized processors and some of the what are some of the issues they face, and how could better butcher training help them and help keep more beef local?
The biggest hurdle that our small local shops are facing is their facilities are old. I mean, these little shops were built in the 40s, in the 60s. They are really new age if they were built in the 80s. And so these, I mean, think about think about what cattle looked like in the 60s. Their heads stood about as tall as your belt buckle. They were pretty wide, they were pretty fat. And our carcasses don't look like that anymore. They are much larger. We've optimized carcasses from a genetic standpoint. It's incredible what we've achieved from a feeding and genetic standpoint, and the marbling we're achieving. But if we think about how old these facilities are, just think about how tall the ceilings are and what it takes to hang a full size carcass in some of these smaller facilities. Carcasses back in the 1960s were probably averaging like 650, 750 pounds. The average right now is 909 pounds, which means that majority, like half of the carcasses are exceeding 1,000 pounds, up to, 1,100, 1,200. And those are just the fed beef. What about like our big Holstein cows? What about the bulls? Like they need a place to go to at the end of their careers. And so our processors are having a hard time just fitting carcasses into their facilities, because livestock producers, they get paid by the pound, and so they are incentivized to continue to increase carcass size, so that they can maximize dollars. But then when those animals enter a processing facility, number one, they might not fit on the rail hanging, and so our smaller facilities have to quarter out those animals and hang the hind quarter right next to the fore quarter just to fit them on the rail. Next, these carcasses, they weigh a lot more. A carcass that used to weigh 650, now it's up in the 900s, the 1,000 pound. These rails are collapsing in meat processing facilities. And when you've got meat hitting the floor, that's a bad day. You can trim it and try to put it back up, but I mean, how long is it going to take you to get a new rail built? And then along those same lines, think about portion sizing for consumers. If you have a carcass that weighs for beef, if it's weighing an 800-pound carcass might create like an 11-inch ribeye versus a carcass that weighs 1,100 pounds, that ribeye might be 16 inches. And so if our consumer wants an 8 or a 10-ounce portion, the smaller carcass would create a thicker steak because it's smaller in diameter. And so then an 8-ounce portion would be a thicker steak. That's great. But our livestock producers are paid on the pound. So they want a bigger carcass. So there's bigger ribeye area. So an 8-ounce or 10-ounce portion is going to be a really thin cut steak. And so there's just some challenges here. And there's a disconnect. And I don't know whose job it is to fix that disconnect for the incentives for livestock producers and the moderate sized carcasses, because that would help in terms of the size of carcasses we have to work with. It's really difficult for butchers on their bodies to manage these really big carcasses. It's a hard job working on cold, wet concrete, and so to wrangle some of these big carcasses, that's quite the feat.
And the desire from both our ranchers and our communities and our, local focused foodies to have these local butcheries. The need to build more facilities is definitely, it
Yeah.
sounds like it's there. And I do think that the USDA is trying to provide grants or loans, especially if it's going to be focused on the local food
Mhm.
system. So it sounds like we need to modernize some of these facilities, to your point, Sierra. And I got to say it again, you're making me hungry as you talk about these cuts, regardless of what ounce size they are. But, as I think about these environments that they're in, and butchers, just like our ranchers, they have a passion for what they do. What is kind of the skills or mindsets that separate the good butchers from the truly great ones? Or is that a fair question to ask?
I mean, and that's a challenge because I mean, I I think what I see when I go in and I'll train individuals in a butcher shop, and I'll be shaking hands at the end of it, and everybody's thanking me, we're saying our goodbyes, and the plant manager might ask me the question of, okay, like, you've trained us, but how do we get folks trained on the level of excitement that you have for this? How do you share that enthusiasm for butchery? And I think that's what it's going to take to create truly great local butcher shops. And that's what I found from these livestock producers that have branched out, and they've revitalized a lot of the local meat shops in their community, because in 2020, that was when whoever owned that facility, they were so tired, they were so burnt out, they couldn't do it anymore because of just the influx. And so then they bowed out, and then another local producer realized the value, and we need this to exist, and they got energetic about it, and they dug deep, and they found the resources to keep it going, and they see the value, and now they are energized by it. And then for them to need to go out and to hire individuals that are equally excited about cutting meat and providing that for their communities, that's what's challenging. I would like to say butchery is cool again. It's definitely a trade. We'll leave it there. It is a trade. It is, electricians, plumbers, butchers. We need trades again. And I think butchery is one of the sexier of the trades because, man, like, it's working with knives, it's working with your hands, it's creating these beautiful proteins, and it's artistry. Like, it really is. And so I think in cities and in nice, well built suburban communities, we are seeing that these butcher shops are generating a lot of excitement and are creating people who want to work there. What's challenging is finding folks in these smaller communities where we've got a facility that was built in the 40s. It smells a little funky. The meat case probably could use a deep clean. There aren't a lot of windows. It's a little dingy. Like, how do you get somebody excited to be a butcher in a facility that might not generate that kind of excitement?
But I have a theory about you, Sierra. Your enthusiasm and your excitement about what you're doing and just understanding and knowing meat sciences, Tammy, don't you think that Sierra is going to inspire a lot of our young people in these trades and butchery? Because there is an artistry to it, and
Yeah.
I just sitting here talk to her. I think I'd like to try it now.
Well, and I love the science behind it and your
Yes.
background in meat science, because when you were talking about different cuts, it's really an anatomy lesson, learning all of the different muscles and the different ways you could cut. And I just find it very fascinating. And my background's in nutrition, so I as a dietitian, so I find the anatomy of it and really the science behind it fascinating. And question for you that's somewhat related is, how do you approach conversations that when people are coming to you and talking about meat and health aspects or not health aspects of red meat?
I mean, everybody is welcome to eat the foods that make them feel good. And I think that's the most important food conversation that we can have with folks. And so I'm never going to, excuse me, try to change somebody's mind about what form of protein that they feel best consuming. For me, that is animal protein. And I think likewise, like even as agriculturalists, when we are when we are talking amongst ourselves and to each other, it is a win anytime a consumer wants to consume an animal protein, whether that animal protein is beef, pork, lamb, wild game, bison, anything. Fish, you can eat anything as long if it's an animal protein, that's a win for the entire agricultural industry. We can then dive deeper and be a champion for the protein that we produce or the one that we prefer and the one that gets us the most excited. But it does make me just a little bit sad from a meat science perspective, when we start really trying to compare apples to oranges across poultry and beef, and even the methods that we produce our critters. What's oh my gosh, what's better? Ugh, better. How do you define better? That's not a scientific word. You can't pin that down. So what's better, grain finished or grass fed? Well, all cows eat grass. They need it. They will die without it. Um, grass finished, that's going to give me more omega 3s. Well, that's wonderful. When I eat beef for zinc, iron, protein, B vitamins. If I need omega 3s in my diet, I'm going to eat a piece of fish. So I think it really does just come down to just being good stewards of all of agriculture. And if somebody does want to ask me about, man, I can't eat beef anymore because it doesn't make me feel good. It's just so fatty. Can I tell you more about some of the lean cuts off a beef carcass? So animals put on fat from the front to the back. And so have you tried a sirloin instead of a ribeye? Or what about a round roast instead of a chuck roast? If it comes to a pork cut, asking your butcher to trim to an eighth of an inch of fat rather than, leaving it as whatever fat thickness is there. And so there can be some conversations with consumers about, well, how do you cook? And what do you like to eat? What does make you feel good? And you can get to the root of their question from there.
And I didn't realize that they put on fat from the front to the back. That's a very interesting
That's new
point.
to me too.
But I do agree with, I mean, all animal proteins, whether it's dairy and milk and cheese and eggs and beef and pork are high quality proteins and better
Right.
absorbed. So I don't think everyone always recognizes that. And especially athletes who are really trying to build muscle. And I know that you're a competitive athlete as well. What do you hear some of the athletes saying, or what kind of questions do they have for you?
Yeah, so anybody who's listening, check out in I think Arizona has a Team Beef, but so I run for Team Beef Montana, which it is run through the Beef Council, but you get a cool jersey and you get to it says Team Beef on it and the back says fueled by beef and it's really fun to go and run my races with beef on my jersey and that does motivate me as like okay, I can't be sluggish today because if I look like I'm tired, if I look like I'm huffing and puffing, like that's a bad representation for, being a beefy runner. And so it's fun. It's like, wow, like if I go out and I win my age division, and I'm, passing guys on the race or other people are passing me, like they'll get to the finish line, they'll be like, oh yeah, I was just, you were fueling me the whole time, or I've been reading the back of your jersey the whole time and I got passed by beef or whatever. Like it creates some fun conversations or, people will be like, yep, eat beef as they're running by or, it's not everybody has to have the same opinion about what proteins that they like, but, um, I do find that for me, I mean, like that is what makes me feel good is a lot of beef protein or pork or chicken. God, I love chicken. So I mean it's just what makes you feel good and about being more positive than negative. And I think that's what the world needs more of, promoting what makes you feel good, not what you don't like, kind of a thing.
I'm the
Absolutely.
same way. I love my meat proteins. And this is my question to you, Sierra. Let's imagine that were gracious enough to go with me to the meat case in any grocery store. Give me counsel because, and I like it all, but let's say I want to have beef. I want to make some beef tonight. What are some of the tips you're going to give somebody? Yes, I've eaten quality meat, but I cannot tell you that I've necessarily picked the best cut for me, if that's even the way to say it. But, wrapping these questions up, just give me kind of some counsel and advice that you would offer to me, who's kind of the novice.
I would always start with tell me more about how you cook at home because that's really going to influence. And so if somebody tells me that well I'm a mom of 4 kids, we are in a heavy sports season of life. Um I don't have a lot of time, but they eat a lot. That kind of situation. I'm not very confident with cooking with proteins like a beef where it's gonna be really expensive, but I'm just afraid to mess it up. So in a situation like that, I would go, let's get a really big, nice chuck roast because a chuck roast, it's got a lot of marbling, it's got a lot of fat. You can put it in a crock pot, and then when you shred it down, you set it, forget it, go with it. It's going to be tender, it's going to be juicy, and then you're going to get multiple meals out of it. You can have it as a pot roast that night. You can turn it into tacos or quesadilla the next day. You could put it in the soup. You can save the broth, and then you could freeze the broth, and find a cut that's going to serve your family for multiple meals. Um, and you're never gonna mess up a chuck roast. My very first, oh my gosh, I'm gonna admit some poor cooking tech. My very first meat cut that I ever bought out of a case by myself was in college, and I went out and I was like, wow, like I wanna make a crock pot roast like what my mom made. And I bought this nice little tidy roast. It was just so lean and small and round. It was the cutest little roast ever. I took it home and I cooked it, and it was dry and it was grainy and it was just a miserable cut. And I called my mother. I said, "Mom, what did I do wrong?" She said, "Well, what cut of beef did you buy?" I said, "An eye of round." She's like, "No, Sierra, don't get the eye of round. You always get a chuck roast." And it was in grad school that I realized it's like the eye of round is the hamstring muscle, and it has a lot of elastin in it, which is like basically rubber bands. They do not melt down over time and pressure. And I just always think back to that horrible eating experience I had. I was like, oh my gosh, I picked the worst kind of beef I could. And I tried to anyway.
But what a good
That
memory.
that's hilarious. I mean, I think we could do a whole segment
We
on
could.
bad college cooking
Yeah,
experiences.
exactly. So we have one more question for you. We always like to ask our guests what are the top 3 tips based on, in your case, you're an educator, you're helping our meat cutters cut better cuts and stuff like that. What are the top 3 takeaways that you would give us in considering, especially if maybe we get into the trade?
Top 3. That's hard. Okay. So I would say for anybody, whether this is for you want to be a butcher, whether this is you are a hunter and you are cutting your own meat, whether you are at the meat case and you're trying to figure out that looks pretty, but how do I cook it? Um, if it is a single muscle, it's going to make for a really nice steak. If it is multiple muscles, it's probably going to make for a better roast. Because just thinking about how muscles, they do cook differently, they have different tenderness, they have different water holding capacity. Water is important for juiciness. And so those single muscle steaks will always be a better eating experience than a multiple muscle steak. So even think about a porterhouse. That steak has 3 different muscles. It's got the tenderloin, it's got the New York strip, and it's got a little sliver of sirloin. And so a lot of times in a restaurant, they'll sell you a porterhouse steak for $80 and call it a porterhouse for 2. And if that's the case, you might need to fight whoever you're sharing it with and say, "Oh, don't you worry. I'm going to just take this little small round portion over here. You can have that big portion." Because then you take the tenderloin and they take the strip. But uh, I would say, like, even if you're cutting your own meat, if you can cut single muscle steaks and multiple muscles as a roast, that'll create a consistent eating experience. Second tip would be, um, Julie, you kind of mentioned earlier, fresh or frozen, what's best. I would say just both fresh and frozen are wonderful. Try don't repeatedly freeze your meat products. Freeze it once. And so if you buy it frozen, keep it frozen until you're ready to cook it. The more freezing and thawing that you do, that water that's in the steak purges out. And so it's not blood that's in the package, it's just water that's seeping out. And that water doesn't reabsorb. And so, it's perfectly safe to refreeze your meats. You're just going to have a drier eating experience. And it's always okay to cook meat from frozen, to cook a roast from frozen, to cook a steak from frozen. For our hunters out there, if you're concerned that, oh man, like this got a little warm, I got it in the freezer, like maybe don't thaw it out to wake those bugs up. Just cook it right from frozen, and that's totally fine too. You will still have a juicy eating experience, but just minimize your freezing and thawing. Goodness. Okay, and then tip number 3. Oh man, I don't know. Have fun with it. Yeah, like don't be afraid to buy proteins that look exciting and to Google a recipe. Because that's really I mean that's where these stories come from. I'll never forget my eye of round and I will always forever and always buy chuck roast from there. But yeah, like when you're at a restaurant, buy this, get the steak that sounds really that you've never heard of before, because that might be your new favorite steak. And that's how we in the meat industry are making a name for some of these steaks. Don't be afraid if you find something new out there, go and ask your butcher about it. Because they might not know how to cut it right then, but they can they can call me up and ask how to cut it, or they will find how to cut it, and then they might discover a new bestseller for them too. So don't be afraid to get creative.
Yes. If they want to either, if a butcher shop wants to hire you to help their team and you come to them, where can they get a hold of you? And do you have a website that gives a lot of the insights that you were sharing with us today?
Oh, yes. So anybody can go to the website, so butchersolutionsllc.com. You can find my phone number and my email and all kinds of good things. During hunting season, I try to post classes on there too. So if people want to do like a virtual hunting class, I try to do those. Otherwise, yes, I come to you. I will come to a restaurant group, to a butcher shop. I trained 2 individuals in their backyard in Arizona, which was that was really fun. So I can go anywhere and help anybody. So yep, Butcher Solutions LLC is the business. You can find me on Instagram. Feel free to reach out. If you have questions that you thought of from this podcast, you can send me an email and I'd love to get back to you.
Oh, that's great
Yeah.
information. This has really been fascinating. And you also will be speaking in Arizona
Yes.
coming up in
Yes.
July, correct?
Yes. She's our keynote for the summer conference that's put on by the Arizona Farm Bureau's Women's Leadership Committee. And Sierra, we are so excited to have you. And just talking to you today is making me more eager to see what you're going to present in July to us.
I have to share. This is going to be one of my favorite events I've ever done because one of my segments is called the meatiest game show ever. And if I could build, I mean, I've built my own business, but if I could actually build my dream job, it would be hosting a game show that is entirely focused around meat. And so let me tell you, this is going to be fun.
Can't
Awesome.
wait to see it. We'll be
Yes.
there.
And let's connect again because like I said, I have only begun to ask this young woman questions.
We have questions.
Yes, we have questions.
Great. I have answers.
We'll
Thank
have you
you.
on again, and thank you so much, Sierra, for joining us. And have a wonderful rest of your week.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Take care.